Welcome back. Now, South Africa has an extremely high rate of food wastage. According to recent surveys, 45% of the food supply is wasted. While the wastage rate continues to be high, the number of people without access to food, especially during the holiday season, remains just as high. To discuss this, I'm now joined by Hanneke Van Linge, who is the founder of Food Rescue. Hanneke, thank you so much for your time. I know people affectionately call you Mum Nosh, so I'm going to call you Mum Nosh throughout this interview. What are the main sources of food wastage in our country, and how do we compare to global averages?
So, hi, lucky to be here today. So on a global average, we are on the same 30% par as the rest of the world. So globally, 30% of food is wasted. So in South Africa, 30% of our food, which is 10.6 million tons, gets wasted. Where it is wasted along our food chain, though, looks a little bit different in developing countries than it does in developed countries. So in sub-Saharan Africa, we waste about 5% of that 30% at household level. But in South Africa, because we're a bit more developed than the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, we waste about 18% of that 10.6 million tons at household level. And a very large chunk, about 48%, I think it is, between the farm and the retailer. So that is where a lot of our efforts need to be focused if we want to start reducing food waste and making that available in the short term. I refer to that as low-hanging fruit. The food is already being produced. Why are we wasting it?
What do you believe are the primary factors that are contributing to this food wastage in our country? Are any cultural, economic, and logistical issues at play?
There absolutely are. You know, I always refer to it as a very fear-based system. There is fear of litigation, fear of safety. There's fear of losing market share. But it's global. It's not just in South Africa. This is everywhere. So to me, there needs to be more political will. There needs to be more civic will, more effort put into not wasting what is surplus. I always say that waste is a verb. Food is surplus until we waste it. So I feel there should be a lot more effort put into taking that surplus and utilizing it rather than wasting it.
Maybe speak to us on the effects on the environmental, social, and economic implications of food wastage in our country. How does it affect, food security and poverty levels? We're already seeing so many people that go to bed without a plate of food.
So we were addressed by the Department of Trade and Industry some time ago. I'm part of the CGCSA's Food Loss and Waste Initiative. And they were very strong on how amazing our Consumer Protection Act is, which it absolutely is. And I'm afraid I kind of put my hand up and I said, it's all good and well for every South African to be protected from unscrupulous, retailers or cell phone providers or car salesmen. But it's also a South African right not to starve to death. So we really have an obligation to take that surplus and turn it into meals. And the impact of food waste is it's environmental, the pesticides, herbicides, electricity, the water, the packaging, the transport, the damage to our road infrastructure, and it all goes to landfill at the end. There's impact everywhere. And I think there's been enough studies done on the effects of malnutrition and food insecurity, not only on individuals, but also on communities, on crime rates, on aggression levels, impulse control. It's low-hanging fruit. We should be focusing on feeding people more.
We certainly should be. You speak about a department addressing you and just some of the partnerships that you do have. Talk to us about the importance of those partnerships with business, with local government, with NGOs, and just in your efforts to reduce food waste.
They're absolutely crucial because no man is an island. None of us can do this alone. So organizations like ourselves work at grassroots level to rescue what we can and distribute it. But we also need retail to be involved. We need agriculture to be involved. We need government to be involved from a top level to change legislation and to drive education. At absolutely every step of the food chain, of the economic ladder, there needs to be collaboration and intervention intervention. So that's why we're so delighted to be part of this Food Loss and Waste Initiative, which was launched in 2019, because that brings together a lot of these stakeholders, and there's various working groups that are trying to address these problems at all the levels where they happen.
And are you achieving the objectives with this initiative?
I absolutely think so. I think about a month or two ago, it was the 4th anniversary of the Food Loss and Waste Initiative, and they put out a nice publication which detailed a lot of the stakeholders that have gotten involved, the signatories that have gotten involved, how it has grown. We're now in the 3rd year of the sort of system or the mentality of what they refer to as Target, Measure, Act. This is part of the United Nations SDGs 12.3, where globally we're trying to reduce food waste or halve food waste by 2030. So there's definitely strides that are being made, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Talk to us maybe just about the challenges that you face in your food rescue efforts.
Again, it's such a fear-based kind of environment that the challenges are, again, at all parts of the food chain. So logistics, the cost of logistics is a huge problem. Having vehicles available to make it as easy as possible for donors to donate, because by the time they are willing to donate, it needs to move quickly, and then organizations have to have the resources to collect and to move and to make sure that it gets to the right communities. It's no use I send 2 pallets of chilies to an ECD in Alexandra that feeds 25 children. So to match up your beneficiaries with your donors. And everybody is economically challenged at the moment. So the resources for these kinds of things are so limited. And I have nothing but admiration for the people in our beneficiary networks and around the country that actually day to day take on the job of feeding their communities with whatever it is that they can actually scrape together.
How do societal perceptions of food waste and food rescue impact, especially your work? I mean, just take us through some of the steps that can be taken to change these perceptions and reduce the stigma around food rescue.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people still think in terms of food rescue as being dumpster diving. I always refer to myself as a professional trash panda, which is maybe a more American term for the raccoons that scratch through the bins. But, there is definitely an element of that. And we see that in our grassroots, our poor recyclers that are scavenging through bins. And so we very viscerally see that, and we connect with that. But food rescue on a larger scale doesn't look like scratching in bins. There's 2 other food rescue organizations, SA Harvest and Food Forward, and we rescue at a scale where it is a lot easier to keep food safe. As to how to make that more palatable to the man in the street, I think it is just education, large, we need to do this large scale on our social media. We need to reach people. And actually just show them that it's okay. It's not necessarily unsafe. There's a lot of education that needs to be done around date labeling, because how many South Africans know the difference between what is best before, what is sell by, what is use before, and what are the steps that we as individuals can take to still make that food safe and palatable. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done, and a lot of amazing campaigns that can be done. And it can be made fun. But in the meantime, there's a sense of urgency, because too many of our people go to bed without knowing where their next meal is coming from.
So maybe before I let you go, you could give us a little bit of that education in terms of best before, sell by. When do I know when to dispose of certain foods?
So one of the first things I always say is we need to relearn to trust our senses. Trust your fingertips. What does the thing feel like? Trust your nose. Trust your taste. Does it taste okay? When we have a best before date, it's a bit like bakery. A croissant or a loaf of bread is at its crispest, at its freshest, best before that date. The sell by date is the date at which it should be taken off a retailer's shelf, because then the claims to freshness can, in a way, no longer be proven and upheld if it is stored at in that particular way on the shelf. It doesn't mean that once it is sold, it is going to deteriorate immediately. We still refrigerate, or we still preserve, or we freeze. So those types of tips can be used to extend the shelf life from the sell by date. The only date where we tend to say we should really pay attention to you is if it says use before, because those tend to be put on products like dairy products or fish or chicken. And those are the dates where there starts a deterioration process, which is not going to be easy to reverse. So at that point, if it says use by, freeze it if you can, or cook it and eat it if you can. But that sell by date is purely a commercial date whereby it should be taken off the shelf by then. It doesn't mean that the day after you should bin it. And I get a lot of comments around that where people say, "Oh, you're trying to kill me because look at the date." And it breaks my heart to know that there's a lot of food waste going begging because there is no education around those dates.
So, of course, an expiry date would be one to indicate that by that particular date, you need to get rid of it. Is there
the use by date, the actual expiry date, yeah.
Right. Yeah. But is there a rule of thumb with regards to best before? I mean, you say that it's not at its freshest, but can I still use it 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 months later?
You know, that depends a little bit on the type of food. If it is fresh milk, for example, it might last for a week. If it is yogurt with active cultures, it might last for another month. If it is bread, it's going to go stale. If it is tinned food, it might be 3 years. It's really hard to have a rule of thumb. And that's part of why I say, do trust your senses a lot more. You know, we've become very reliant on dates and on being told what to do rather than trusting our own senses. And I always work on what we call the FIFO principle. First in, first out. Don't eat the freshest things first while older things sit gathering dust and time in the back of your fridge or in your cupboard or in your pantry. But trust your senses. That tends to be the best advice that I can give.
All right, Mom Nosh, thank you so much for all this advice. We certainly will put it to good use, especially with the overindulgence and abundance of food during the festive season. Thank you so much for your time. That's Hanneke Van Linge, who's the founder of Nosh Food Rescue.